Rural insular communities are undeniably a huge part of the folk horror genre. The entirety of Mark Gatiss' Unholy Trinity, the supposed holy grail of the genre, follow these communities and their hostilities towards outsider figures, from dismemberment, immolation, and whatever this is. The unholy folk violently assert one truth: this is a local shop for local people. However, is this necessarily a fair presentation of rural communities? It could be said that the Unholy Trinity is, to put it lightly, problematic in its presentation of small rural communities, often showing them to be willfully isolated and disconnected from the outer world. They are characterised as gullibly superstitious, unintelligent, and just generally backward. Folklore scholar James Thurgill notes that by showing folk in this light, it is evident these films approach the rural landscape and its folk as a commonly understood and singular entity, flattening their experiences. He continues that such framings are erroneous. Pastoral landscape exist as multiplicities. Different countrysides are different. This video will further explore this derogatory flattening of rural communities, specifically within the Wicker Man. We will also look ahead to modern folk horror with Cockatiello's 2023 film Acre, and see how presentations of rurality have developed to capture the difference of different countrysides. So, let's discuss Robin Hardy's 1973 film The Wicker Man. The Wicker Man follows the devoutly Christian police officer Sergeant Howie and his journey into the remote Scottish island of Summerisle. From the opening scene showing the need for a private plane to get to Summerisle, we see that the island is insular and Howie is trapped. Here he investigates the mysterious disappearance of a little girl, Rowan Morrison. The islanders are hostile to Howie's investigation. They are interpersonally frosty with him, and they blatantly lie to him. It's clear he's not wanted. These islanders hate anything foreign.
No apples?
I expect they've all been exported.
He discovers the island to be a neo-pagan cult led by the charismatic Lord Summerisle. This pagan religion was engineered by Summerisle's grandfather to inspire a work ethic to work on his new strain of tropical apples. It is now used by the new lord to subjugate and quell resistance from his struggling folk subjects now that these crops have failed. Here we see a clear abuse of power from the Lord's Summerisle. Hardy has compared the lords to fascist dictators. In an interview for the magazine Cinefantastique, he says, "Lord Summerisle keeps people in the thrall of superstition." Maybe it's not too big a connection to make between the final scene of The Wicker Man and the Nuremberg rallies in Germany. It was no accident that Hitler brought back all those pagan feasts in his rise to power. Through this thrall of superstition, Lord Summerisle engineers consent for a violent and totalitarian, almost fascistic, control of the island. No official records may be accessed without the written permission of Lord Summerisle. He controls the information that leaves the island, and he harnesses the sexual agency of the island's women. However, the islanders appear entirely oblivious to the totalitarian control they live under. They're under the impression that they are free. Hardy shows that these rural folk are not only frosty and hostile, but also gullible and to an extent stupid. They are unable to work out what the city-dwelling outsider Howie can, alone in a few simple days of investigation. For Hardy, the metropolitan mentally outclass the rural, and the rural are the victims of their own gullibility. Hardy's rural actors believe the pagan lie they have fed, with no qualms or reservations, acting not as individual, thinking, feeling characters, but as a singular entity of Lord Summerisle's will, unquestioning puppets in his game with Howie. They have no agency and are thus dehumanised by Hardy. To further demonstrate Thurgill's critique of traditional folk horror, it's worth discussing how Hardy fails to capture that, as he quotes Clerk, different countrysides are different. The Wicker Man is set in Scotland, as evidenced by the accents of his characters. While Summerisle is admittedly not a real place to draw a pagan tradition from, the paganism we see in The Wicker Man is not based on real Scottish tradition, and presents other pre-Christian traditions as authentically Scottish. The Wicker Man's associate music director, Gary Carpenter, wrote an introduction to the sheet music of the film's score. The decision to generate a fur folk narrative drawn from many traditions was a conscious one, paralleling the film's non-site-specific conceit. You know, sort of Scottish, but not a Scotland that really exists. This hodgepodge pagan culture is evident across the film. From classical references to Aphrodite, the reference to the Italian commedia dell'arte with the character of Punch, and the use of the Anglo-Morris traditions like the obios in the film's final procession. The Wicker Man has no regard for showing the nuances of Scottish, rural, pagan tradition, instead presenting all pre-Christian tradition as the same. The film does not effectively utilise its setting by creating a uniquely Scottish folk horror, instead generalising all folk culture into a singular entity, erasing the cultural differences of different countrysides, leaving us with a vague, non-specific rural identity, again generalising and depersonalising folk communities. So, how can we create a folk community in the genre without falling for the same trappings as the Wicker Man? For that, let's see how Acre stacks up in these presentations of the folk. Acre follows a young couple, Richard and Jules, in the 1970s. They are retreating from their urban lifestyles and moving to the Yorkshire Dales. The film documents their grief in the loss of their son, Owen, and the haunting of an old oak tree, said to be the gateway to another world for a folk devil named Dandelion Jack. Let's take a second to discuss the different folk landscapes seen in both films. Both could definitely be described as insular. Summerisle is separated from the mainland by sea, and the Dales are remote and rural, separate from the city life in Leeds previously had by the family.
Well, sometimes a big change in their environment could, yeah.
And difficult to reach by the visiting Harry.
Had to take it easy once I got off the A1.
Oh, yeah.
However, while the Dales are shown to be remote and insular, it's not as separate and entrapping as Summerisle. The family live within commutable distance to a university, and are close enough to Wakefield for Owen's own psychiatry appointments. While obviously terrifying and backward in its own right, Wakefield is undeniably a city, and universities are often seen as hubs of progress. The characters of Acre are not trapped in backwards communities by their environment as the characters of the Wicker Man are. They are readily connected to metropolitan zones, no planes needed. Instead, Richard and Jules are trapped there emotionally. This is the land that their son lived and died, and where Richard suffered severe abuse as a child. They cannot leave this place because of the feelings tied to it. They need to be processed and cannot be abandoned. Tyler challenges the idea that folk horror requires insular landscapes to create horror. Instead, he shows how our mental connections to landscapes and the traumas that occur there are the real horror. The characters of Acre can be split into two main spheres: the northern folk, Richard, neighbour Gordon, and his friend Mrs. Ford, and the southern outsiders, Jules, Harry, and Richard's university colleagues. Just looking at our Yorkshire folk, we instantly see how Acre differs from the stereotyping Wicker Man. While there are plenty of flatcaps and whippets, and tyke talk worthy of a Hovis advert with Gordon,
What's bothering you?
Richard embodies an atypical folk. We see he is intelligent and educated, hugely contrasting the gullible sheep of Summerisle, and this is because he works as a university lecturer, itself representing a progress of knowledge and metropolitan society. However, despite these seemingly metropolitan qualities, Richard affirms himself as firmly folk. He has a deep physical and genealogical connection to this land, having his mysterious upbringing with his father here. He also refuses to cut his hair or hide his accent to fit into southern environments. Despite his soft southern job, Richard takes on the qualities of the Yorkshire wild man, embodying the mardiness of Heathcliff as he wanders the fields. While Richard is not a typical vision of the folk, he undoubtedly is folk. These two separate visions of Yorkshiremen already challenge the Wicker Man's singular entity approach to folk, but Tyler further challenges the presentation of folk actors with the agency the folk have in his plot. In The Wicker Man, we saw gullible folk being generically hostile and cruel to Howie, and being led blindly by their feudal overlord to enact the climactic ritual. Acre takes a different approach. The folk are not hostile to outsiders, instead treating them with a typical Yorkshire regional warmth that markedly diverges from the typical home counties hostility of the genre. They still withhold information from outsiders, but this is not to hinder or antagonise them, but protect them. And when they eventually bring about the ritual return of Dandelion Jack, it is done with apprehension and reluctance. Cockatyler additionally challenges the supreme knowledge of city dwellers found in the Wicker Man. The southern outsiders in Acre do not recognise the true power or influence of Dandelion Jack, as Howie does at Lord Summerisle's. Instead, it is the northern folk that possess the true knowledge of Jack and his legend, having the strength to resist the outright possession he inflicts on these southern outsiders. To conclude, Cockatyler shows a folk body that are uniquely Yorkshire in their mannerisms, and they are not simply dog's bodies to a higher plan or second fiddle to an urbanite hero. Acre subverts genre conventions that are represented by the Wicker Man. In his presentation of folk, instead of stupid, backwards hicks, we see a truer, more fleshed out vision of rural people. They are given agency, intelligence, and friendliness by Cockatyler, and a more nuanced Yorkshire identity, instead of the generically rural, generically pagan one afforded to hardy summer islanders. So, Acre effectively reflects that different countrysides are different. And if the genre wants to avoid the flagrantly derogatory behaviour of the Wicker Man, it would do well to learn from Cockatyler in this way going forward.